welcome back to the Saturday Scholars College Football Podcast. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. That is Xan. I am Shoob, and today we continue our trek through the Big 12. It is Big 12 win totals part 2. Today we will be covering the 4 Texas schools plus Oklahoma State. So kind of going geographically here through the Big 12. And this is an interesting group of teams here. We got a little mix of hot seat, a little mix of teams that are contenders to win the conference, and a little mix of teams that are looking for bounce back seasons compared to what they got last year. So it'll be an interesting batch of teams here. We also have a new coach in this batch of teams. So how we doing, Xan? We ready to cover the Big 12 part 2?
I'm more than ready to cover part two, man. You know, Oklahoma State's in this group, so it's always a fun time going over my pokes.
Oh, we know it will be. And I brought out well, if we can get it to appear, I brought out the craft beer blonde ale in the frosted mug for this one, just because, second one, we're double dipping here, 2 videos in one night. It'll be released, of course, as 2 separate videos on YouTube, but if my mug stops cropping out here with the green screen background. But yeah, so I figured I'd bring out the craft beer for this one.
hmm Gotta
One
feel
little
good. You
sip.
gotta feel good.
Gotta feel good, man. Talking about the Pokes, talking about the Baylor Bears, the Houston Cougars, TCU, Texas Tech, and of course Oklahoma State. So let's get into it, man. Alphabetical order starting at the top. The Baylor Bears come into 2024 with a win total of 5.5 wins on Caesars Sportsbook, even money on both sides. Dave Aranda enters his 5th season at Baylor. Oof. It has been some tough times recently. Baylor had a 3-9 season last year. 3-9. Pretty far-fetched from that 2021 season where they won the Big 12 and got that huge Cotton Bowl victory or Sugar Bowl victory, I should say, against Ole
We
Miss.
should we should never talk about that season.
We probably shouldn't talk about that season. That Big 12 championship game,
Oh my
we all
God.
know. But if you're a Baylor fan, that ending was to your delight. But yeah, your coach is on the hot seat in 2024. The seat is hot for Dave Aranda. And honestly, it's a bit surprising. It's just a trajectory that I did not see coming. I don't think either of us did. We were both high on this hire when it first happened 5 years ago. And I'm just surprised to see that we are at where we are at with Dave Aranda and his tenure at Baylor. But as far as the 2024 season, we got a win total of 5.5. So the sports books expect a little bit of a bounce back. But what's your say, Xan, on the Bears?
This team was bad last year, man. And you mentioned they went 3-9, and if it weren't for like a miraculous comeback to beat the UCF Knights, they'd be 2-10, man. Like so,
Yep.
let's just let's just remember that. You look at the metrics for this team, man, and they were almost sub 100 in both categories, both offensively and defensively. Almost sub 100. They cracked top 100 in offense, but boy almighty, this was a terrible team from top to bottom. So much so that he fired his offensive coordinator, and we now have Jake Spavital coming in from Cal. So we'll see if Jake Spavital is able to, reignite this offense and get something going. It's kind of interesting because, as you were saying, like just as far as 2021, like it seemed like this program was heading in the right direction on the proper trajectory, and all of a sudden this program's falling flat on its face. And we're talking about Dave Aranda being fired when, just a few years ago we were talking about him being one of the best coaches in the league. So it's really interesting to see how this has happened to Baylor. But luckily, I think there are some things for Baylor to look forward to this year. So much so as in getting Daquan Finn at the quarterback position. That's automatically an upgrade. You get him from Toledo. He's a dual threat guy. I do like that right there. Your running backs aren't that great, but one saving grace is that their offensive line looks pretty dang good this year. I think they actually will have one of the better offensive lines in the Big 12 this year. And so that's going to help with Dominic Richardson and Richard Reese, who honestly have not been effective together. I remember Richard Reese in his freshman year. I thought he was going to be a star. He really kind of popped off early in his career, but then, he's kind of fallen back from grace. But we'll see. I think this will be a good year for Dom Richardson and Richard Reese to be a good 1-2 punch, especially with that O-line that they've got. We've got returning Monterey Baldwin, Keetron Jackson, and Hal Presley, a bunch of guys who've been in that program for a long time. We all know Monterey Baldwin, the deep threat, so he's good. He can take the top off the defense. Really like that. The other guys bring some snaps, but ultimately we're going to need to see a little bit more production from this group, and I think we will get it, especially with an improved quarterback position and having a pretty solid O-line. And what I mean by the solid O-line, man, I look and I saw that they got. I'm gonna butcher this name, man, but it's Omar Agbidion from Montana State. And they're like, oh, cool. Well, three-star transfer.
Hey,
Woo. Ooh, go us.
you
Woo.
got to butcher several more names in order to catch up to me. I'm running first place in that metric right now on this podcast.
Hey, that's why we went with DJU. We were talking about him. But anyway, man. So this guy right here, I'll just call him Omar. Uh, three-star transfer. I don't know how. I don't know how. 24/7 comes up with their grades. But this man was ranked the number one most efficient guard in all of college football by PFF, and Baylor brought him in. So that's a pretty big get, if you ask me. And you also return Kurt Daniker. You bring in Kurt Daniker from Ohio, who is also a top 20 graded guy by PFF. Then you have Campbell Barrington returning. And so you've got three really, really good offensive players right here on the offensive line players. So I'm expecting this to be a pretty dang good unit. We look at the defensive side of the ball. You return Cooper Lons, but you lost Siaka Ika, which is a huge loss. That dude is just an absolute run stuffer. He's a complete. So I'm just expecting the defensive line to take a significant step back without Siaka Ika. I mean, he is just so dang impactful. Like even Coach Gundy, when he's talking about Baylor, he said that guy's going to play on Sundays, and he said that years ago. So, I mean, I'll tell you what. I will say this, bringing in my own people here. Whenever Gundy says this guy's probably going to play on Sundays about his opponents, they usually do. Guy can recognize talent. So anyways, then we look back at the next group, past the D line, the linebackers. That group is really weak, Shoob. That's really concerning for me. I mean, this group was 103rd in defensive efficiency last year, this defense as a whole. And my God, man, I look at this D line, I look at the running, I look at the linebackers, not very good. I look at the secondary. There's at least some guys returning in the secondary, like Caden Jenkins and Carl Williams, some solid corners. But then you got Kendrick Simpkins, a whole transplant from Western Kentucky, who's supposed to start for you. And then you return Devin Bobby, who was kind of wishy-washy, sometimes good, but sometimes a liability. So it doesn't seem like there's going to be a significant amount of improvement with this defense. They should be able to crack the top 100 shoe, but that's not saying much. So I will say Matt Powledge has got his work cut out for him this year. I do like the offensive potential with this team, though, Shoob. The offensive potential is definitely there with the offensive line play, returning production at wide receiver and running back. Granted, no one there is truly elite, but you have a quarterback there who's dynamic. You've got protection, and you've got a new offensive coordinator who's known for being a pretty creative guy. He actually did a decent job at Cal. And so I'm really excited to see what Jake Spavital can do with this offense. We look at the schedule, man. You get Tarleton State. That should be a win. You go at Utah, a non-conference game, even though it's the same conference. You probably lose that game, but don't worry. It won't hurt you, Baylor. You weren't going to play for the Natty anyway. You're playing for the Big 12, baby. It's not going to hurt you. Then you're going to play Air Force. You should beat Air Force, but just be careful, man, because if your defense was as bad as it was last year, you may not beat Air Force.
Hey, they lost to Air Force in the bowl game a couple of years ago, if I'm not mistaken. So,
yeah, so you got to be careful. And then you start conference play at Colorado. And this is when Colorado's still feeling pretty confident because they've probably like beaten Colorado State and all the other rum-dums they have to play. And then BYU, okay? So pretty light start there. You got Colorado, BYU, winnable games. But for Baylor, these are more like toss-ups than they are like truly should win games, if I'm being quite honest with you. And then we go at Iowa State. I expect them to lose that game. You get a bye week to go prepare for Texas Tech. I expect them to compete in that game. I lean towards a loss. Then you get Oklahoma State. I think they lose that game. Then you get TCU. I think they lose that game. Bye week to prepare for West Virginia at West Virginia. I think it's nice if they have a bye week to prepare for West Virginia. If I'm not mistaken, it seems like a lot of teams are getting bye weeks to prepare for West Virginia. I think the Big 12 just like straight up gave them the hardest schedule and made sure that everyone got a bye week for them.
what did they do?
Anyways,
What did they do to your mark?
I know, man. Like I don't know what's going on here. But anyways. And then they go at Houston, and then they got Kansas to finish the year. Kansas is an interesting one. As we mentioned, if you watched the last video, check out our synopsis about Kansas and why we think it's interesting to play Kansas late season versus early season. Could very much be a benefit to play Kansas late season versus early season. If you want to know more about that, check out our previous video and hit the Kansas section. But anyways, that could play to their favor. So we're looking here at 5.5. We need to go bowling to go over. So Tarleton State, book it. Air Force, possible. BYU, Colorado, possible. Uh, Tech, possible. Maybe West Virginia off the bye, Houston, and Kansas. So these are all possibles. That's seven right there, in addition to the guaranteed win. Do I like them to basically win the vast majority of those games? I like Daquan Finn. I like this offensive line. But Shoob, I don't like this defense. Shoob, I look at the efficiency metrics, and what's glaring to me is I just cannot ignore how bad they were last year. 90th in offensive efficiency, 103rd in defensive efficiency. They were almost sub 100 as a power four team in the two categories that matter most, obviously. I don't see them making that much of a leap. If you get better on offense, I think this could be a top 50 offense, but I don't think this defense is going to leap to where they need to be in order for this team to win some of these games. And I could even see them losing to the likes of an Air Force or a Colorado or a BYU. They might even split between Colorado and BYU. But if you're trying to get this over, you need both of those because your schedule gets harder down the line. So I'm going to lean under Shoob. I think it's more likely they go 5-7 than they go 6-6, but I'm going to go with low confidence.
Low confidence on the under. So there's a few interesting storylines with Baylor going into the season. Of course, obviously, you got Dave Aranda on the hot seat with his job. But as far as the offense, I think that obviously you look at Daquan Finn surface level, yeah, it definitely presents an upgrade. But here's the thing: you brought in Jake Spavital. They're going to run more of an air raid scheme. Not exactly what Taquan Finn ran at Toledo, but you also have Sawyer Robertson there as the backup. And the reports have been so far, granted, I don't know how much stock you put into this, that Sawyer Robertson has been in the mix for the starting job. And I'm like, there's no way. But here's the thing.
Possibly.
If that's true, that's a huge problem because Sawyer Robertson, of course, he's familiar with the air raid system because he was at Mississippi State when Leach was there. And so he's familiar with it. But in my opinion, even regardless of scheme, Daquan Finn should be a better option over Sawyer Robertson. That's why you brought Daquan Finn through the portal. It's because you need an upgraded quarterback because Shapen just didn't cut it for you last year. So that kind of presents a little bit of a question mark for me, or at least a little bit of a red flag. It could be noise, but something to keep an eye on. And as far as defensively, you kind of highlighted, man, it's hard to tell with the front seven where there's just so much turnover. I mean, I like to say this a lot, but you figure it can't be that much worse than it was last year. But I don't know. Maybe it can be. If you're an Iowa fan, you say this every year, and it does end up being worse. Than so
That's
it's
true.
it's the Anakin meme right there. Secondary will certainly be the strength of this defense, but here's the thing with the defense is that Dave Aranda is taking over the play calling. He doesn't have a defensive coordinator anymore. So Dave Aranda is taking over the defensive play calling himself, which is not out of the ordinary. We see some head coaches do this a lot. But the thing is, it kind of I don't know what to say about it. It kind of, the guy's coaching for his job here. And I'm like, now he's taking over as the play caller. So obviously he's going to put a lot of attention on the defense, and that's Dave Aranda's acumen as a DC. That's where he made his money. That's where he had great success as a defensive coordinator. So he's going to put a lot of effort into this defense, a lot of his time and coaching. So I would imagine that the defense does improve a little bit because Aranda's taking over as the play caller. I mean, there
I
isn't
mean,
much worse to go
I,
down. You were 111th. Like,
Shub, I think Aranda was, I think his mindset was legitimately like, you know what? If I'm getting fired, I'm at least doing it with my own play calling, man. Like,
taking ownership of your team right there. Yeah, see, I respect it. But on the same token,
and I did misspeak. Matt Polage is gone.
that's fine. But on that same token, what does that mean for Jake Spavital? It means all of a sudden Jake Spavital is really going to be running the show offensively because Dave Aranda is going to be putting most of his attention to the defense. So with Spavital coming in, you better hope that Daquan Finn and Spavital, this thing clicks, or else I don't really know if this train is going to get back on the tracks, to put it lightly. But as far as my model has Baylor at 5.6 wins, which is actually right on the money for this 5.5 win total right here. They drew mostly a tougher Big 12 conference slate, I would say. And you already pointed out that Utah game is a non-conference game. So The Big 12, they had already scheduled a home-on-home series with each other as a non-conference opponents, and the Big 12 decided to just let them keep it. But keep in mind, that's not a official Big 12 conference game. So in my eyes, that only can benefit Baylor because Baylor's probably going to lose that game. It's at Utah. So the good news for Baylor is that doesn't count against you in the conference standings if you lose that game to Utah. But as far as their actual conference slate, you know, at Iowa State, at Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, TCU, at West Virginia, Kansas, those are some of the tougher teams in the league. I don't know if I see many wins here on the table for Baylor, even if Dave Aranda ends up coaching up this defense and rebuilding this thing, or at least putting it together in one season. I don't know if I see that happen, especially with this schedule. And another thing too, I only have them as favorites against Tarleton, Air Force, BYU, and Houston. So I only have them as favorites in 4 games. So which means if you take care of business in all 4 of those games, you got to win at least 2 games and come up and nip one of your opponents that I think is a little bit better than you. And my last point here is that Baylor's last 2 recruiting classes haven't been the greatest. I think Baylor's last 2 recruiting classes have been some of the worst that they've had under Dave Aranda. And I think that I don't think they've recruited a single blue chip guy, a single 4-star. I mean, that one quarterback that they had committed that went to Oklahoma State and then ended up flipping to
To
wherever the hell he
TCU.
flipped to,
Yeah.
TCU. Yeah. But the point is, like, they don't have a single 4-star recruit. And
Well,
reading the tea leaves,
Baylor did get Austin Novosad, a quarterback. Actually, did he flip? He might have
he
flipped
flipped to
too.
Oregon,
Sorry.
didn't he? He
Yeah,
flipped to
he did.
Oregon.
He did flip to Oregon.
That's my point here, is that the tea leaves don't look great here in the recruiting for Dave Aranda. It's hard to see him turning, even if they do, let's say, make a bowl game this year. Let's say DeQuan Finn and Spav it all works out and this thing hits, you make a bowl game, that's great. If you go 6-6, are you still happy with your status as a Baylor fan? I don't really know. I I don't see, I'm sorry, but I don't see this working out for Dave Aranda. Even if things go well, even if they beat this win total, I don't know if you go 6-6, you're coming off a 3-9 year. I don't know with recruiting the way it's going. I don't know if you're a Baylor fan or if you're the AD, if you're happy with that situation. And I think it's more likely than not that Aranda's gone at the end of the year. It just seems like a hard proposition, but I could be wrong. I could be wrong, but I'm going to say more likely than not they don't hit this win total because the schedule is on the tougher side and Aranda probably gets fired because if you're a Baylor fan, 6-7, 3-9, and then if you don't make a bowl game this year, 3 years in a row of losing seasons, that's not acceptable at Baylor with their recent track record and history. Dave Aranda is going to be gone. So I just see a lot of downside potential here, and I have to go under. I have to go under, but I'm going to do it with low confidence because my model has this win total right on the dot. I think the defense probably will get better because Aranda's taking over the play calling. I mean, DeQuan Finn on the surface is an upgraded quarterback over what you had last year in Chapin. So like all these things are like, yeah, you're upgrading, you're getting better, but just overall, I don't think your coach is going to be there at the end of the year, and that's probably not a good sign for this win total. And the schedule is tough. So that's my final synopsis on the Baylor Bears for 2024. So under with low confidence, just like you. Okay. Next up is the Houston Cougars. Houston comes in with a win total of 4 wins, a huge heavy shade to the under there at -160. Willie Fritz, brand new head coach. Welcome to the Big 12. Willie Fritz in his first
Fritz
season.
Magic.
Fritz Magic, baby. First season at Houston. This team went 4-8 last year, of course, with Dana Holgerson, who was let go. And Willie Fritz comes in as the new head coach in Houston. And you and I both love this hire. I believe you and I both gave this an A or an A-. I think that Willie Fritz was a guy that probably could have gotten a better higher tier job than Houston, in our opinion. And I think Houston is pretty fortunate to be able to land him. And another thing that I think Houston has going for it with this hire is that Willie Fritz, yeah, he's on the older side, but this is probably his last job before retirement. So he's a guy that if he's got still, a few more years of coaching in him, I don't know if he's going to make a huge lifestyle change there. I feel like Houston has their guy at least for the next 4, 5, maybe 6, 7+ years if Willie Fritz decides to coach that much longer. And that's probably his last job before retirement. And the guy did a hell of a good job with Tulane. And he put Tulane football on the map. And What's to say he can't do the same thing with Houston? Granted, however, as you will get into here in a second, seems like a little bit of a rebuilding year for Houston. They lost a lot in the portal. There's a lot of turnover on this roster. Might be tough year one, but we like the coaching staff. We know that for sure. Xan, take it away.
As you said, man, I mean, love Willie Fritz, but this team has really undergone a big turnover. There's not much left on this team to really look at and say, dang, okay, Willie Fritz, let's see you cook up. Right now, it's going to be more like, hey, Willie Fritz, do what you can for now and build for the future. That's kind of where we're at. And part of building for the future is hiring his coordinators, which he brought in Kevin Barbay, who was the former Mississippi State offensive coordinator, to coordinate his offense. We'll see what that looks like. And then he brought from Tulane his defensive coordinator, Shao Wood, who was a pretty good defensive coordinator over there. They had good success there, so I do like that a lot. One thing, though, is that they do return Donovan Smith, and he does have a lot of starting experience, but, he's not a prolific guy. He's probably like what I would epitomize as like your stereotypical run-of-the-mill average quarterback. And that's about what you got with him. He's not bad. He's not good. He's like right there in the middle, capable of keeping you in games, but not necessarily going to will you into a game and win it for you. And then you've got your halfbacks who aren't really, that storied. You got Parker Jenkins, Stacey Sneed. They're going to have to step up. We look at the wide receivers, man, not really a lot of guys with production there. I mean, their best guy in terms of production is Joseph Manjack, who's a sub 600 in production. So they've got a lot of guys that need to step up here. And then you lose your best tackle in Patrick Paul, who's a second round pick in this last draft. So, and then I look at the rest of the line, there's just no one really there that really sticks out. And then you tell me you lose a second rounder, man, that's going to be rough. And then defensive line, man, we remember like a year or two ago, we were talking about how good this D line was for Houston. That's not the case anymore. Houston, I mean, they brought in Keith Cooper from Tulane, which I do like, and they return Anthony Holmes, but otherwise they don't have much at that spot. This D line is definitely depleted from what it was in the past. The linebacker is just a bunch of transfers at the spot, so it's really hard to know what they have at that position. We look back at the corners and the safeties. I mean, they do have Kristen Davis from Southern, who grades pretty well, but again, that's a guy who came from a lower level. Not to say those guys can't perform well, but again, a lower level nonetheless. And then Latrell McCutcheon, who comes back, who didn't even have enough snaps to like generate a grade. So that's something that's also concerning. And then we see the safeties. They return AJ Halsey, who's a very average player, and then a bunch of transfers once again, and no one really grades all that highly. So Willie Fritz has a lot to figure out with this team. I think the thing here is just to see some type of improvement with their younger guys, because I'm not expecting Willie Fritz to get this done in year one. Their schedule's kind of tough as well. You look at it, Shoob. I mean, you start with UNLV, that's a winnable game, but then you go at Oklahoma, that's probably going to be an L. You play Rice, you should win against Rice. That's the Houston showdown.
They didn't win last year. They remember they lost to Rice in OT last year.
Yeah,
So
but they should beat them. They're at home this year.
but it's a revenge game.
But I mean, that's the showdown, the battle for Houston, best team in Houston. And then at Cincinnati, that's a winnable, but still like, I don't know, I kind of lean Cincinnati. Cincinnati's got a little bit of an offense there. It's at Cincy. Then you got Iowa State, probably a loss. At TCU, probably a loss. Bye week to prepare for Kansas. We'll see what the Jalen Daniels situation looks like. Even if that situation is like not in Kansas' favor, I still think Kansas wins that. Then you've got Utah and Kansas State. Then Arizona. Ooh, the gauntlet right there. That's 3 losses right there, man. Like, you might play some of these teams closer than expected, but I don't think you're going to beat any of those 3 teams. Then you play Baylor, who I think is like a notch above you. I don't think they're great, but I think they're just a notch above you. You should be able to at least be competitive in that game. I don't think you beat them. And then you play BYU. So I look at this, man. What win potential do we have? What win potential? We're sitting there at a line of 4. The win potential is UNLV, Rice, Cincinnati, Baylor, BYU, maybe 5 teams, and then 5 teams for win potential. So to get this over, you got to win all 5. You lose even one, you're on at least a push. And so I can't do it, man. I love Willie Fritz. I think he's got a good future to at least propel Houston back to bowl eligibility. But man, not this year. Push to under, low confidence, Houston.
Push to under, low confidence on Houston. Yeah, but this line's sitting at 4 even. It kind of gives you at least that push insurance there. But yeah, this is a low win total and for good reason. But the offense it's probably going to get worse, I think, personally. I think it could get worse from 76 just because of all the wide receiver losses. And think about the guys that they lost in the portal too. Houston lost two four-star rated transfers in the portal to Texas and Oregon. And the offensive line is probably going to be pretty bad. I have in my notes, I think this is probably going to be one of the worst offensive lines in the league. So Donovan Smith, yeah, he's coming back, but he's got experience. But I think what's around him is taking a massive step back. It's going to be a bit of a struggle. And then on the defensive side, I don't know if it's quite as bleak as initially presented because I think they did it. I mean, this was the 109th defense last year. It's terrible, but they added a lot of depth in the portal, and I do like the talent that they added in the portal. I think it may take time because these guys are all new, but I could see this unit jumping inside the top 100 simply because one, it's just a good coaching staff and a good defensive coordinator hire that Fritz brought over from Tulane. I think it may take some time, but I actually think there's a chance this defense ends up being the better unit of the two sides of the ball at the end of the year for Houston. So that's at least one thing, but it's going to take some time. My model only has Houston at 3.8 wins, so just under this four number. I don't have them as a strong favorite in any games. Not a single game I have them as a strong favorite in. I think the biggest favorite I have them in is against UNLV, where I have them as a 65% chance to win, which really isn't that's not saying much considering it's UNLV, but the point is these five games that I have as toss-ups or probables are UNLV, Rice, Cincy, Baylor, and BYU. Luckily, they did draw three of the other bad teams in the Big 12, Cincy, Baylor, BYU, but they're either toss-ups or barely favored against those teams. That non-conference slate, you're going to take the loss to Oklahoma. UNLV and Rice, it's like UNLV and Rice are not like the worst of the G5. They're kind of like they're definitely top half of the G5 in terms of talent. So those are two G5 teams that you might lose to. I mean, hell, I already mentioned it. They literally lost to Rice last year. So you better beat Rice this year. So yeah, I don't see how they can get above this four number personally. If they do get above this four number and they win five games, I mean, tip of the cap to Willie Fritz. If I was a Houston fan and if you won five games or if you even got to a bowl game with this roster, I mean, man, Willie Fritz is knocking out of the park like right off the bat, but I just don't see that happening. Um, yeah, I'm gonna go under 4 wins, and I'm gonna say it with medium confidence. This play at four, I'm gonna go medium confidence to the under because I have a hard time seeing them getting to five. I just don't know if the path is there, but you already mentioned it. Long-term arrow, long-term trajectory with this coaching staff. I like it. Things are definitely pointing up. It's just going to be a tough rebuilding year. I see Houston as a very similar situation to Michigan State with Jonathan Smith. Good coaching staff, just tough rebuild in year one. So I think year two will be the year to look out for Houston fans. So just preach patience there. All right. Next up, the Oklahoma State Cowboys. Oklahoma State comes in with a win total of 8 wins on Caesar, a huge juice to the over at -160. Mike Gundy's entering his 20th season. 20th season at Oklahoma State. Can you believe that, man? This is going to mark 2 decades of Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State. Pretty surreal. Cowboys went 10-4 last year. Wild season. They looked like one of the worst teams of the Big 12 after the first month. And then they won the final Bedlam. They had some crazy wins last year. They ended up going to the Big 12 championship game. I mean, what a wild ride for Oklahoma State last year. Sort of came out of nowhere. And that Big 12 championship appearance, certainly a good omen, I would say, and something that this team can shoot for this year. But Xan, this is your alma mater. Oklahoma State, take us away on the Pokes in 2024.
I mean, I love the Pokes this year, man. I mean, I think we're really strong, like all over the place, except for two pretty key areas I'm concerned about, and that's quarterback and D line. Quarterback mainly because, Alan Bowman, I mean, yeah, he threw for 3,400 yards last year, but look at that ratio, man. 15 tutties, 14 pigs. That's not going to get the job done. We can definitely admit that Oklahoma State was very fortunate in some of these games last year to come away with the victories. And I'm happy to be on the winning side of that, but more often than not, you're not going to consistently be on the winning side or have Lady Luck on your side like that. So Oklahoma State really needs to see improvement from Alan Bowman this year in terms of ratios, efficiency, all those things. And what happens with Alan Bowman is going to determine how far this team goes. The quarterback play is incredibly important because you have a great running back in Ollie Gordon, Doak Walker winner, 1,700 yards, 21 touchdowns on over 6 yards a carry. I mean, that's absolutely insane. And then you have an entirely experienced offensive line coming back, all seniors. So it's going to be a pretty good group together. And you're more than like two deep with guys who have like significant snaps. This is one of the better O-lines that the Pokes have had in a while. Then you look at the wide receivers, you got Brandon Presley coming back. He's basically a 1,000-yard guy. You've got Rashad Owens coming back. He's a 900-yard guy. You've got Xan Shoob coming back, who was actually the #1 alpha dog before getting hurt last year. He was doing great. And then we've got Talon Shetron, who was like a 95 grade guy. So this wide receiver room's got some dogs in it. There's no excuse for this offense not to be good this year. It all hinges on Alan Bowman's play, and Alan Bowman's going to have to step up if the Pokes want to win the Big 12 this year and have a chance at the college football playoff. It's just how it goes. Now, we look over at the other side of the ball, and what really concerns me, and I will say year one, I think Brian Nardo did much better than anyone expected in his first year. Not everyone will agree with that, but for a first-year coach, he did a great job, an absolutely great job, especially coming from a Gannon University. Come on now. I think Brian Nardo is doing great. But my concern is the defensive line, man. We basically have Colin Clay, Cody Walterscheid starting, and if you know me, like, I've never been a big Walter Scheid guy. Even when his big brother played at OSU, it was always more of like a grit and a family kind of thing as to why Gundy chooses to start him rather than like raw talent. I remember his older brother, I think, started for 3 seasons and like didn't record a single sack in those first 3 seasons or some crazy stat like that. And so for me, that's kind of speaks volumes. But either way, if you look at PFF, same thing, does not grade well. But at least the transfer, Obi Ezigbo, grades pretty decently, although he comes from a lower level, I believe, JUCO. So we'll see if that pans out. But that's the biggest weakness for this defense. Otherwise, Oklahoma State's pretty solid at these other levels here. They've got Nick Martin, Colin Oliver, and Justin Wright in the linebacker group. Very solid group right there. Then you've got Corey Black and Cam Smith returning. Corey Black's basically been a starter his entire career. Cam Smith, has been getting some playing time, has been emerging a little bit. So we'll see if he could take another step in his game. Then you've got Kendall Daniels returning. I mean, everyone at Oklahoma State knows who Kendall Daniels is. And then you've got a couple other safeties who are looking to slate back in, like Lyric Rawls, Trey Rucker, Ty Williams, guys who have like good pedigree and who everyone really likes. So we'll see if they could slate in and step up. So overall, there's a lot of potential with this Mike Gundy team. You can never count out Mike Gundy, as we were last year after losing to South Alabama and getting crushed by South Alabama. Everyone said this season's cooked, the season's over, and somehow, some way, somehow, that team made it to the Big 12 championship. Still, I don't know how you do it, Mike Gundy. You make me doubt you. You make me think it's time, and then you make me think, okay, maybe you know what you're doing. And you do it time and time again. Like it is the ultimate. It's the ultimate roller coaster of emotions with Mike Gundy and being an Oklahoma State football fan. But anyway, let's dive into the schedule here, man. You play South Dakota State week 1. Look, you should win that game, but that's not gonna be a cakewalk. South Dakota State hasn't lost a football game in over 2 years. I mean, they're like the FCS Kings right now.
They did lose a lot off that national championship team, though. They had like something crazy, like 40 or 30 or 40 seniors. So I would expect Oklahoma State to take care of business. They should
win the game, but I will say,
they are the defending FCS champions. Yes,
just because they haven't lost in a couple of years, and I'm so scarred from that South Bama game. You're giving that South Bama was a D1 opponent, though. I'll give them that. A good Sun Belt team. Still, man, like it still gives me cause for concern. But they should win. You play Arkansas. Arkansas is not as good as they were in years past. They're definitely down. You should be able to beat Arkansas. And you're at home. Should be able to be Arkansas is the operative word here. Then you go at Tulsa. I'm hoping that you start 3-0 there. Worst case scenario, it's 2-1 if Arkansas gets you. Then you play Utah. That is a crucial game. That is like the battle of the Mike Gundys. Kyle Whittingham and Mike Gundy is like, they're the same dude. just in different parts of the world. Like, I mean, they've both been at their respective schools for basically the same amount of time. I think they're hired in the same year. They have both
Yep.
brought up programs who don't have a significant amount of financial backing, like relative to like the A&Ms and Texases of the world, and they develop really well and have a lot of success. So it's literally like the Mike Gundy, Kyle Whittingham blueprint playing each other right here. So a lot of respect. I can't definitively say Oklahoma State will win that game. I actually kind of think Utah would be a favorite in that game, even though Oklahoma State's at home. Then you go at Kansas State. That's just a rough slate right there. You got to play Utah and then play K State. Boy, you could easily go 0-2 in that stretch right there. So it could start ugly for the Pokes. Then you get West Virginia, but you're at least at home. And historically, I know West Virginia's gotten you here recently, but historically, generally speaking, OSU usually gets West Virginia. I think they would take West Virginia right here. Then on a bye week, you go at BYU. Should be able to get BYU off the bye week, I believe. Then you should be able to beat Baylor. Should be able to beat Arizona State. So the schedule gets a little lighter there. You go at TCU. I have that more as a toss-up, but you should be able to win that one. You get a bye week to play Texas Tech, who I think is improved. But even when Tech improves and has good teams, some way, somehow, Oklahoma State always finds a way to have their number in the strangest ways, and like in almost every meeting that they have, even when Tech is improved. And then you go at Colorado, which by that point, I think Colorado will be in full quit mode because they won't even be bowl eligible by then, more than likely. So, Shadur probably won't even be playing. A lot of their, I'm sure Prime will be benching all his like starters, or at least his son. So come that game, I think Oklahoma State will be in good shape. So let's look at this. My potential losses: Arkansas, Utah, K-State, West Virginia, TCU, and Tech. I'll say those are like your potentials, right? And I think you can at least go 3-3 in those potentials. If you go 3-3 in that, you're looking at 9-3. Even if you go 2-4, you're looking at least a push there. So I'm not thinking they're going to go 1-5 and get the under in these potentials. So I like them to go at least 3-3 or 2-4 for push to over. Give me over on my Pokes. I'm going to go at this with, we'll say, moderate confidence.
Moderate or medium confidence on Oklahoma State over 8 wins. I like it. Well, I share pretty much the same level of optimism, sort of. This team, though, there's a lot of weird things to look at with this team. And I think it's because last year was such a weird season, so there's a lot of conflicting messages that I'm being told here when I do my analysis on this team, but I'll get into that. Offense, it has to improve. Like I say improve by default a lot, and I usually say that when I'm talking about bad teams or bad units. Well, literally the entire offense is coming back, so it's got to be better. I really think that Alan Bowman, yeah, his touchdown interception ratio not great last year. Turnovers were certainly an issue, but I don't really know how much there is to improve with Alan Bowman. I mean, the guy's what, like 24? This is like his 6th year in college
He's got to be
football.
older than that, yeah.
Yeah, probably older than that. But I don't really know how much more room for improvement there is. I think it is with Alan Bowman, it is what you get. He is what he is at this point. The thing is with the quarterback room is there's a chance here, and you know this as well. There's a chance here that Alan Bowman might not even be the best quarterback on this roster.
More
But
than likely not, but I mean, Gundy's track record would show that he probably isn't the best quarterback on the roster.
i.e. Brandon Whedon being the third string in 2009, the future first round pick. Yes, Gundy does have a track record for not starting the best quarterback on the roster, and there's a chance that Alan Bowman is not the best quarterback on this roster, but I view that as a good thing when judging these win totals because it means you got quarterback insurance. But overall, I like this QB room 1 through 3. I think either one of those three guys can start between Garrett Rangel and Zane Flores behind him. Uh, yeah, I mean, the skill positions are just amazing. I mean, you got Brendan Presley, who's a projected round 4 pick. You have Ollie Gordon, projected late first round pick at running back. I mean, this team is good. And then as far as the defense, there's a lot of interesting shuffling of positions. And one thing that apparently they're going to be doing is they're going to be moving Kendall Daniels to linebacker, is
He's
what
going to
I've been
be
reading,
he's going to be like a kind of a hybrid. He's going to come down as a linebacker, but also come back as a safety. He's going to be doing both.
like a rover position sort of
Yeah,
deal.
basically.
Yeah, there's a lot of reshuffling. I heard Colin Oliver as well, like kind of is used to or more suited for the 4-2-5, wants to play up front a little bit more, but still at linebacker. It's going to be interesting. On the surface, though, I do love this linebacker room. I think it's probably one of the best linebacker rooms in the Big 12, if not the best. Linebacker is definitely the strength of this defense. I'm not as down on the defensive line as you are. As a unit, Oklahoma State graded out as kind of average on the defensive line last year. And yeah, some guys not the greatest individual grades, but when you have that much experience returning, I feel like, and they added a little bit of depth in the portal as you highlighted, I feel like the offense or the defensive line rather might be able to be about above average in the Big 12 play this year, but we'll see. But I wouldn't say like a massive jump there. I think for me, the weakness on this defense is probably the safety room, in my opinion. I think the safety room is the one thing that you can point at. It was a problem last year, but other than that, I was personally surprised that this defense was 37th overall in schedule adjusted efficiency, higher than the offense was. That was kind of a surprise to me. I think, if anything, it kind of tells you that Brian Nardo might be the goods if he did what he did last year with that defense. I think a lot of Oklahoma State fans are probably, this defense wasn't quite as bad as you may have thought last year. I think that's what
No, Brian Nardo's
we're
doing a
getting
great
at
job.
here.
Yeah.
Yes. And with most of the defense returning, I think that there's a chance here this defense can jump up and be pretty solid this year, but we shall see. My model, believe it or not, is not the biggest fan of the pokes in 2024. It is not like Oklahoma State for some reason. Let me have you guess here. What do you think the model has in terms of wins for Oklahoma State?
7.
It has 6.7 wins for Oklahoma State.
Oof, I think
And
they're going to be terrible.
I don't get it. I do not get it, man. I don't get it, but the model is not high in Oklahoma State. It has Oklahoma State as underdogs versus Utah, at Kansas State, at TCU. The model likes TCU a lot. And then it has toss-ups versus Arkansas, West Virginia, at Baylor. Not really a toss-up, but a probable. And then Texas Tech, and then at Colorado at the end of the year. The thing is, though, I disagree with the model there on that assessment. They're a little bit better than Arkansas. You should beat Arkansas. In fact, I think you have to beat Arkansas because Arkansas is going to be one of the worst teams in the SEC. They have a coach that's probably going to be fired at the end of the year. They don't have KJ Jefferson anymore. I know they're an SEC team, but that's going to be one of the worst SEC teams this year. For the Big 12's reputation and for your own sake, you have to beat Arkansas. That is a must win, in my opinion. And as far as Colorado, I think the fact that they do get Colorado at the end of the year, like you said, is a good thing because if Colorado's out of Big 12 championship contention at that point, you
Shedeur
heard it here
Sanders isn't
first.
going to be
Shedeur
playing.
Sanders and Travis Hunter are opting out for the season. They're not playing. Deion Sanders probably not even going to be the coach of Colorado next year.
Yeah, once his son
What's
goes
his
to the
kids are?
NFL, he's like, I'm
Yeah.
good. Yep.
Yeah, that I think the timing of when they play Colorado is great. That might be a team that has no business taking the field there at the end of the year, assuming that their season goes as we expect it to go, however. But I like the scheduling dynamics here. I think that's one thing that the model maybe is overlooking. Their two bye weeks are middle and late in the season. I like that they have the bye week to prepare for Texas Tech, which is a team I'm pretty high on. They drew Arizona State, Baylor, BYU, West Virginia at home. I mean, those are some of the middle to weaker teams in the Big 12. They got four of them this year. So I think, honestly, including Colorado, it's sort of a overall, I'd say, favorable Big 12 draw. I think the biggest thing is that you just got up front, you got that Utah and Kansas State game up front. But if you can get through those first two games against Utah at K-State, let's say you split and go 1-1, I think you're looking pretty good for the rest of the year because most of those games the rest of the year, in my opinion, are pretty winnable. And you have those two bye weeks still ahead of you after that Utah and Kansas State slate. So I'm I'm liking the scheduling dynamics here for Oklahoma State, and that's a reason why this win total, which by the way, this win total opened up at 6.5 at the beginning of the summer, and it just got hammered over. So this thing's been hammered up all the way to 8. But anyways, I'll get to the point here. My final assessment on Oklahoma State, I'm going to go over, but I'm going to go at it with low confidence because I can't just completely ignore my model here. I think the reason why my model is down in Oklahoma State is because it knows that Oklahoma State went 5-1 last year in one possession games. And yes, they did have a lot of bounces go their way last year. They had a lot of good fortunes in one possession games. It was definitely not the second best team in the Big 12, despite the fact that they made the Big 12 championship game. I think we all can agree on that. The thing, though, I think that is completely offset by the fact that virtually the whole team is coming back. And if you look under the hood, especially on the defensive side of the ball, I kind of like what I see. So I think that's why this line of 8 wins, I think, is pretty fair, in my opinion. It's going to be a tougher Big 12 this year. It's an overall really balanced league. And I think 8-4, maybe 9-3, I think is a fair assessment for Oklahoma State in 2024. So I'm going to go lean over with low confidence. Moving on to TCU, the Horned Frogs coming with a win total of 7.5, a shade to the under there at -150 on Caesars. TCU, man, what a roller coaster between 2022 to 2023. You go from literally playing for the national championship to not even making a bowl game last year. 5-7. Quite a dip in the Sonny Dykes' second season in Fort Worth, but the good news is that this year I think they are probably in store for a bounce back, and the sports books agree with that. They have their win total pegged at 7.5, so certainly a lot better than 5-7 from last year. What's your take on the Horned Frogs in 2024, Xan?
Well, they've got a new DC, Andy Avalos, who was fired from Boise State, so that'll be interesting to monitor with this team. I look over at the offense because I'm just going to go about this how I normally go about this. Josh Hoover is returning. Decent player. He has room to grow, room to develop. We'll see. About 2,200 yards passing last year, so there's a little bit to be happy with right there if you're a Horned Frog fan. I do look at the running backs though. It's a little bit questionable. I mean, you've got Cam Cook. I mean, good young player, but he hasn't really done anything yet. And then you've got Trey Sanders coming back, who's been honestly, let's be real. Trey Sanders has been due to injuries and other various things in his career. He has not lived up to his potential at
Yeah.
all, not even close. And so their running back room is a little bit to be desired, or at least it's very unproven. And then we see their wide receivers and Savion Williams, who's a 500-yard guy. You got John Paul Richardson, another 500-yard guy. But I do like the addition of Eric McAllister, who's an 870-yard guy from Boise State. So they do have some options at the wide receiver position for Josh Hoover to throw to. But we look at the offensive line, man. They lost Brandon Coleman to a tackle, goes in the third round. And like we mentioned, it's really hard to replace a third round tackle. And unless you're like one of these, high echelon Big Ten or SEC teams who can just go buy one in the portal, so I'm ultimately expecting this team to probably be a little bit worse off on the O line, but they did bring in Bless Harris, who grades out pretty decently to replace them at the tackle position. So hopefully that'll be a saving grace for the Frogs this year. Ultimately, I think their offensive line will be an average unit, not a terrible unit, not a good unit, just kind of right there in the middle. It just needs to be serviceable enough for this offense to function. They were a pretty solid offense last year, Shub. They were pretty efficient. They were in the top 30. But I don't know if that's going to maintain this year. We will see. It's going to be interesting. I think they'll still teeter in the top 40, but can they maintain top 30 status? I don't know. Looking over at the defensive line, you've got Timon Mitchell returning in the middle. He's all right, but the rest of that D line doesn't look really too stout. I look back at the linebackers. I say Davion Deal coming in from Tulane. He grades out pretty well, and you return Namdi Obiazor, who grades out pretty well. So you've got some backup right there to that D line. But you look at the secondary, you lose Josh Newton to the NFL. So that's obviously going to hurt when you lose an NFL corner. But they did bring in Jatravis Broughton from Utah, as well as Lamarion Hayes, and return Abe Kamara at the nickel. So, I mean, they've got some talent in the secondary, as TCU always seems to have talent in their secondary, and that's no exception this time around. You bring Bud Clark back, you've got some safety action, but ultimately, man, I don't know why your model is so high on TCU. I look at this team and I mean, yeah, they've got some talent here on this roster, but I don't see a significant proportion of this roster that just makes me go, wow, this is a really, really good unit. I see TCU here at 7.5 for this win total. They go at Stanford. Early season, I think that could be a little trappy because Stanford, although isn't the greatest team, they're still well coached. It's early season. You could easily lose that game if you were not ready for that game. That one and it's at Stanford. I have that one up in toss-up territory. You play LIU after that. You should beat them. Then you've got UCF, who is no cakewalk. Then you got at SMU in the Iron Skillet, which at SMU, it doesn't matter. Home, away, it doesn't matter. It's the Iron Skillet, your Dallas-Fort Worth area. Then you go at Kansas, Could be a little tough early season. Then you get Houston. Then you get a bye week to go at Utah. So getting a bye week to prepare for Utah is nice. You play Texas Tech, then you go at Baylor, Oklahoma State, bye week to prepare for Arizona, which is nice, and then you finish the season at Cincinnati. Shoot, their schedule's kind of tough, man.
Yeah.
Um, I look at their schedule and the model, your model must love them, and the sports books must love them too, because they're giving them 7.5. And I know that this is juiced to the under, and I think it's with good reason because quite honestly, Shu, I just don't I don't see how they win 8 games on this schedule unless they are just significantly better than I'm expecting them to be. Um, and that's not even a notch on TCU. I think it's more of speaking volumes about the Big 12 from top to bottom, just being more quality with these new additions as well. Uh, your only guaranteed wins on here, I'd say, are like LIU. You should be able to beat Houston. You should be able to beat Baylor and Cincy. And those aren't even all guarantees, but those are like your should walk away with these wins. Then you should potentially be able to beat Stanford, although that one does scare me early on. And then I don't know, and then maybe you steal a few in the middle here, but you're gonna have to steal more than a few to get this overshoot. And for me, I don't know that I see TCU getting to 8 here. Um, I think it's more likely that they actually maybe go 6-6 or 7-5 than they go 8-4. And so I'm going to go under on the TCU Horned Frogs. I'm going to do this with medium confidence.
Medium confidence on the under for TCU. Well, this will be our first. I won't say it's a huge disagreement, honestly, but I'm a little bit higher on TCU, and I mentioned the model was a little bit higher on TCU as well, but that was higher in relation to what was on Oklahoma State's schedule in the last segment. The model actually has TCU at 7.4, so the model thinks that TCU that this line is actually very appropriate. So it's all relative, it's all relative speak, but the point is, I think I'm in agreement with you about the offense, even though I do like Josh Hoover, and I think that there's a good chance for him to take a step forward from last year in his sophomore season. He showed out a lot as a freshman last year, taking over for Chandler Morris when Morris got injured. If you look at their numbers comparatively, it was pretty much a comparable passing stats between Josh Hoover and Chandler Morris. The only difference is, of course, Josh Hoover can't run like Chandler Morris did. So overall, that dual threat ability is not there with Josh Hoover as it was with Morris. But I still like the idea of having Josh Hoover in a full season. I think that there is a chance that TCU won't skip a beat in the quarterback room this year compared to last year. And yeah, skill positions definitely taking some downgrades here. I mean, you lose arguably your two best offensive players last year, Imani Bailey and Jared Wiley at tight end. Jared Wiley was a great tight end for TCU. And so you lose your two best skill position guys. They did add some depth in the portal, but is there really going to be that standout guy in the skill positions rooms for me? That's the big question. And offensive line too is a huge question mark. I mean, you have few starters returning. So TCU did have like one of the best offensive lines of the Big 12 last year. I'm with you. I think it has to regress this year. It's probably going to be average this year, I would say. But the fact that Sonny Dykes had to go in and get what 3 starters in the portal, I think shows that he's not happy with his offensive line, or at least with the pieces that he had returning. So I have to imagine this offensive line takes a step back this year. But on the defensive side of the ball, they were 66 last year. I think this is where the TCU can take a jump because, of course, you already mentioned Avalos at DC. On the defensive line, there is some returning experience, and a lot of those guys individually graded average. I think they need true sophomore Paul Oiwali to take a step forward. If that happens, I don't think this defensive line will be quite as bad as it was last year. And I like what they did in the portal with their linebacker additions. Caleb Elamzor, 4-star from Cal, Devion Neal from Tulane. You already mentioned pairing him with Obi Azor. That's a solidly good linebacker room, in my opinion. I really think that the only perceived weakness for me is maybe the secondary. I think the secondary is probably the weakest unit as a whole on this defense. I like their front six a lot more than the secondary, but that's me personally. But as far as the schedule, 7.4 wins, that's what the model has. I'm totally with you. If you don't bring your A game, or if you don't bring basically your B game for Stanford, you're at risk of losing that game. It is a little bit more of a tougher draw. However, I do like that they get Utah and Arizona off buys. I have toss-ups, UCF at Kansas, at Utah versus Texas Tech, and then Oklahoma State. Those are what my model has toss-ups against. It has them as a underdog against SMU, which I don't agree on. That's another team that we disagree on. I'm not as high on SMU as you are. I think that the Iron Skillet is a little bit closer to a toss-up. I'd probably still favor SMU just a hair because it's at SMU. Granted, I don't you already said it. I don't know if that really matters a whole lot, but
It's DFW. Yeah.
yeah, but you get the point. I see that game as mainly a 50-50, and then it has them as an underdog to Arizona. I think the model likes Arizona a good bit too, even though we haven't got to them yet. So yes, there are a lot of toss-ups, and there's a couple games where TCU's an underdog. 7.5 does seem like a little bit more of an ambitious line, but my model's saying that it's pretty accurate. Another thing too at TCU last year, they went 0-4 in one possession games. They did not have things go their way in one possession games last year. I do not think that this team was nearly as bad as their record showed. Uh, and I think that's evidenced by the fact that their offense was still a top 25 offense last year. Their defense was not great, but it wasn't bad. It wasn't piss poor bad. So I really do think that this is still a very solid team. And I see them winning anywhere between 6 to 7. And I think maybe if things go well for them, I think they can get to 8 wins. So I'm actually going to go over here. And the only reason I'm going over is because I've had a lot of unders so far. And
So mathematically, it's got to go somewhere.
I gotta, I think I'm going at this low confidence, by the way, shocker. But I think at the end of the day, I was like, listen, it's TCU. I just don't think that last year's team was quite as bad as it showed. And on the second hand, like it's still TCU. I think everyone's writing them off, and Texas Tech for that matter as well. Like TCU and Texas Tech are very solid, viable Big 12 contenders. I think any given year. I think last year they kind of quietly faded down because they just didn't have things go that well in one possession games. I see it bounce back. Like Sonny Dykes is a good coach. They have good coordinators. I think this team is just better than we're giving it credit for. So I'm gonna go over here, but with low confidence for a lot of the same reasons that you said. Schedule is not the easiest, and there definitely are some things you can poke at with this roster. But I'm gonna screw it. I'm gonna go over with low confidence for TCU. So that's a little bit of a disagreement here with the Horned Frogs between you and I. All right. Last but certainly not least here, Texas Tech. Wrapping up this video in Big 12 Part 2, Texas Tech comes in with a line of 7.5, just like TCU. Slight hair to the under at -120 there on Caesars. Joey McGuire is entering his third season at Texas Tech. They went 7-6 last year. Texas Tech definitely had a good bit of hype going into 2023 and did not live up to the billing. Of course, Tyler Shuck got injured. I mean, that's nothing new. And then he transferred. But you got Baylor and Morton coming back, and you got a good amount of starters returning, especially on offense. But yeah, Texas Tech's doing a lot of good things in recruiting and the portal, but you got to start seeing those wins translate on the field. And I think that's what Texas Tech fans are kind of expecting here. It's kind of a put up or shut up year for Joey McGuire in year 3. What's your take on the Red Raiders, Xan?
You know, what was really surprising to me, Shoob, is that, when you think of Texas Tech football, you think of all of the offensive explosions that they have had in the past 2 decades, just offense, offense, offense. But this team last year, their strength was actually their defense. They spouted a top 30 defense last year, and their offense was sub 50. So, I mean, that's what needs to change in order for this team to take that next leap. Joey McGuire has gotten people in Lubbock really excited, so much so, like almost every year, but then they consistently fall short of what the expectation is that is set because Joey McGuire has been kind of bringing that heat. He's been, like, honestly, when I was watching Joey McGuire, like everything runs through Lubbock, all these things, that I'm like, yeah, that's a passionate, fiery coach. Like, yeah, I can understand. I can understand why players want to run through a wall for this guy. That's what Tech needs, but they need that to translate into wins as well. They need that attitude, but they need him to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. Baron Morton's probably going to be our starter this year. Baron Morton has had, I think he's a pretty good quarterback, if I'm being honest with you. He he's had his chances to play in the past, and he's got decent. He's basically got a 2-to-1 ratio, and he's a good dual threat guy. He's a tough kid, really like him. I think he's got good potential. He's certainly, in my opinion, much better than Tyler Shuck or what they've had in years past. Um, but I really like the return of Taj Brooks. That's kind of a big thing for me. I mean, Taj Brooks is a 1,500-yard rusher. Those guys don't grow on trees. And then you've got Cameron Valdez backing him up, who's basically a four-star guy. Really nice to have. Then I really like the addition of Josh Kelly from Washington State. That's a great, great add by the Red Raiders. 900 yards, 8 touchdowns coming in right there. Great production. Washington State grows these good receivers, man, just for Big 12 teams to farm. I'll tell you what. But anyways, then you have Coy Eakin returning, another 400-yard guy, and then you brought in Caleb Douglas from Florida. So we'll see if that translates at all, getting an SEC talent in there. And then we look at the offensive line. They picked up some solid guys in the portal, and they've got a decent returner. I think this will be a pretty solid offensive line unit. So honestly, I expect improvement from the Red Raiders on offense this year. I do. And I know that you and I both kind of drank the Kool-Aid a little bit on the Red Raiders last year, and we ended up biting the bullet on that one. But it seems like they do have some pieces here to take a step forward. We look on the defensive line. Really solid rotation of guys in the interior of that defense. I actually really like this defensive line in general. They have a good depth here. And they also have I really like the addition of DeBraylon Carroll. That's also a very quiet, sneaky good addition. Doesn't grade well in the transfer portal rankings, but PFF certainly likes him. And then we look back at the linebacking group. You return Ben Robert, who's a pretty average guy, and the rest of the group could use a little bit of encouragement, but it doesn't mean that it can't happen. Especially with Tim DeRuyter. I think Tim DeRuyter is doing a great job over there as the DC. And then we look back, you return Braylon Lux, who grades out pretty dang well. You have Marion Horn starting. If I'm not mistaken, Marion Horn was a 4-star, if I'm not mistaken. It does suck that you lose Dadrian Taylor Demerson to the NFL, but you do return CJ Baskerville, who also graded pretty well as a safety, and then you're supplementing some other guys in to replace that. So ultimately, I think Tech is a pretty well-rounded team. I don't see any glaring issues with their team. I think linebacker might be like one of their weaker areas. There might be a hole, like a small hole in the secondary. But ultimately, I mean, this team is pretty well-rounded, and they're gonna be a pretty good team. They were sub 50 offensive efficiency. I like them to be in the top 40 this year, if not the top 30. They're top 30 in defensive efficiency last year. I like them to at least stay there. I really like Texas Tech, man, and we're looking at 7.5 wins, schedule driven. Let's look at it, man. You could be a good team, but if your schedule doesn't like you, it may not matter. So let's see. Like the Red Raiders, they play Abilene Christian, should win that game. You go at Washington State. I will say that can be a tough game because it's early season. And Washington State, they're going to have a chip on their shoulder going into that game. They just got left out in the cold by all the Power 4 teams. They didn't get an invite to a team or to the Big 12, a conference that they felt they were worthy to be in. They're going to want to come punch the Red Raiders in the mouth. I'll tell you that much. And it's in Pullman. That's not going to be an easy one. I do favor Texas Tech in this game, but this is not a definitive, knock it up win, for the Red Raiders. Then North Texas, you should win that. Arizona State, I think you win that. And then you get Cincinnati. Very favorable draw to start the season, your Big 12 season, with Arizona State and Cincinnati. I think that's really good for the Red Raiders. Get some confidence, start 2-0 in league play. Then you go at Arizona, feeling a little bit confident. I think you can give Arizona a run for their money. That's a toss-up. You get a bye week to prepare for Baylor. I think you can beat Baylor. Then you go at TCU. I think you can play TCU pretty well. I think you can either beat them or play a really close game. You go at Iowa State. I think you'll match up well with them. I kind of favor Iowa State because they're at home. You got Colorado. Again, this is late season Colorado. Who knows if Colorado's even trying anymore by this point in the season, if their season's already cooked. Then you get a bye week to prepare for Oklahoma State. That's huge because Oklahoma State's been a thorn in their side for so long. Having a bye week to prepare for the Pokes, who is a team that also might be contending for the conference championship at the end of the season, that's big. And then you got to finish at West Virginia. Shoob, I mean, I'm giving 5 losses here. 5 losses is my window here, teetering between this over and this under. These 5 losses, let's see, possibly Wazoo, possibly Arizona, possibly TCU, possibly Iowa State, possibly Oklahoma State, and possibly West Virginia. Otherwise, the other ones, I'd be shocked if they lost. So that's maybe 6 teams. I don't expect them to lose all 6 of those games. And so with that being said, they just have to go 2-4 in those 6 games. And honestly, I think the Red Raiders can do it. I'm going over on the Red Raiders. Um, and you know what? I'm going to do low confidence though. And the only reason I'm doing low confidence is because I have been burned by the Red Raiders before in believing in them. And I feel like every time that I buy a ticket to Lubbock, it never, I never get to cash it in. So
Very fair on that confidence assessment there. Yeah, I am buying my ticket to Lubbock this year, and you know what? Yeah, we got burned by them last year. In fact, I specifically remember this team in particular being a team where I was like, I want to go over on them because I'm buying the hype. My model is saying don't buy the hype, and I bought on the hype, went against the model, and I paid for the price for that. But you know what? I think that this team has post-hype sleeper potential, kind of like Penn State. You
they're well
thought
rounded.
last year maybe was the year to get all this hype momentum. I think maybe we were just a year too early. I think this is the post-hype sleeper year for Texas Tech. Starting with the offense, here's the thing. We both like Bayron Morton. Bayron Morton put up pretty solid numbers last year. Keep in mind, he had an injured shoulders playing through an injury half the year. And I'm just thinking if you get a full healthy season of Bayron Morton, he can improve on rather mediocre numbers last year. I think that there is another level to unlock there. I mean, just give the poor kid some health. I think that's really what Texas Tech needs, and frankly, what Bayron Morton needs for his career. But I think just a healthy season
He's a
from
tough
him.
kid.
He's a tough kid, and I think just some good health and some positive health luck for him can go a long ways. And I like that they brought in backup transfer Cameron Brown, who was a 3-star rated transfer from West Georgia, who's a pretty solid dual threat option from the FCS level. So I like that they did that as the backup option, insurance policy there. But you already went into detail on the receiver room. I like it a lot. As a Gator fan, I can speak Caleb Douglas. Certainly not the guy that's going to make your eyes pop, but I think it's a very solid addition there for Texas Tech. But I like what they did with the tight end room. I think this tight end room is very quietly very good. You brought in 4-star transfer Jalen Conyers from Arizona State, and you also returned Mason Tharp.
Yes.
Mason Tharp, 6'9" tight end last year, great as a plus value player. I mean, this is a loaded tight end room, and they're three deep at tight end. I didn't even mention the third string guy. I think they're three deep at tight end. I really like Texas Tech skill positions, in particular the tight end room. You already talked about Taj Brooks, projected day 2 NFL draft pick right there. One thing about the offensive line is that on paper, I like this offensive line a lot. You got those 2 transfers coming in from the G5 at left tackle and left guard. I really like Ty Buchanan at right tackle, graded out very well. And you got Caleb Rogers, who was at offensive tackle last year, graded out as a plus value guy, but then they moving him to right guard, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not the coach, but if you're a Texas Tech fan, you got to explain that one to me because the guy graded out pretty well as a tackle. From what I know about football, tackle's a premium position. Definitely harder to play than guard. I don't know why you would move a guy who's successful at tackle inside the guard, but we shall see. So I think this offensive line, though. I mean, outside of the shuffling of the deck that kind of confuses me, it was one of the best offensive lines in the Big 12 last year. I think it's going to be better, but it may regress if these changes don't pan out. But we'll see. I just have some questions there, but I could be wrong. I'm going to go with cautious optimism on the offensive line. And then defensively, man, I have the same assessment. This is quietly a very good defense. My only questions, like for you, are in the secondary. I think 24th last year in defensive efficiency, schedule adjusted. I think we could see a jump for this defense inside the top 15 to 20. I think this is very quietly going to be a pretty solid, pretty good defense. My model has 7.2 wins for Texas Tech. I actually disagree with that. I think that this win total should be closer, or the model win total should be closer to about 8, because I think the scheduling dynamics are very favorable. And here's why. I just talked about how I was confused about all the shuffling they did along the offensive line. You got 2 transfers coming in on one side at left guard and left tackle. Well, here's the good news for Texas Tech. Offensive lines need time to gel together. This early season slate is perfect for them because outside of, Washington State on the road and Pullman, that might be a little tricky, but you're still the better team. Washington State lost Cam Ward. You should win that game. Those first 5 games are pretty favorable. you should win all 5 of those games. And
They
I
can
think
easily
that's
start 5-0 going into
it's
that
the
Arizona game.
perfect, yes, it's the perfect ramp up for this offensive line to gel together. I think that's one thing that I'm kind of giving the offensive line the benefit of the doubt here. And secondly, I look at the games where I only have them as underdogs. I only have them as underdogs at Arizona and at Iowa State, of course, but the rest are they're either favorites or they're toss-ups. Well, you already mentioned they got the bye week to prepare for Oklahoma State. I know it's away, but you got the bye week there to prepare. We like that they have Colorado away or late in the season, I should say. They have Colorado at home, but they have Colorado late in the season, which I think is good. And then you have West Virginia at home, which is a team that you could consider in toss-up territory. I think this is very favorable scheduling dynamics here for Texas Tech. One by mid-season October, one by late in November. I think that's perfect. I I like the scheduling dynamics here. I think this win total should be closer to 8. I'm calling my shot here at Texas Tech. I think that this team can win 8 games, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they finish like 9-3, assuming Baylor and Morton can stay healthy, which
If
I
they start
think,
5-0, I think that's a good shot.
yeah, it's very likely this team gets off to like a 5-0 start, and they're ranked and everything. I think there's post type sleeper here, like I said. So I'm gonna go over with medium confidence with Texas Tech. The only reason I'm not going at it with high confidence is because it's the Big 12. It's the Big 12. Like these teams are all pretty close to one another. So, one injury, it can really just derail, it's not like the Big 10 where if Ohio State suffers an injury, like, oh, boo-hoo, you're still going to win like 90% of your games.
Yeah.
It's in the Big 12, you suffer an injury at a key position or one of your best players suffers an injury, like these things, you're cooked. So that's why I can't go at all these teams here in this league with high confidence, but when I feel good, I'll go at it with medium confidence, and I feel pretty good about Texas Tech. I really like what they're doing, but I'm with you. It is really a put up or shut up year for Joey McGuire. These wins got to translate on the field, but I really like what they're doing in terms of what the talent that they're bringing in the portal, recruiting, of course. I mean, you brought in a 5-star wide receiver in Micah Hudson. That's pretty
Mm-hmm.
exciting. Like that's
Yep.
awesome. I think that's a very exciting time to be a Texas Tech fan, and I think you can expect things going in your favor in a positive way in year 3 under Joey McGuire. So I really think that this is a sleeper to win the Big 12 championship for me. I think this is a sleeper team. Nobody's really talking about them to win the Big 12. I think that they should be in the mix.
Oh,
So
they
I'm going to
absolutely
say
are. We thought that last year too, though. That's why I'm treading lightly with just one confidence point.
Xan is Xan's not forgetting last year. You get burned by one team one year. It's hard to go at it again the next year. But you know what? If I get burned twice in a row by Texas Tech, then so be it, man. I will I will never buy into Joey McGuire again if he burns me. But I every bone in my body's telling me that this is a sneaky good team.
You'll
So
have a Gonzo grudge.
I will have a Gonzo grudge. That's right. Well, this will wrap up the second part of our Big 12 win totals here. And this was a fun batch of teams to cover. I enjoyed it, and I'm calling my shots here with these last 3 teams that we covered: Oklahoma State, TCU, and Texas Tech. I fired overs in all 3 of them. I think I can get overs on 2 of the 3. I think between Oklahoma State, TCU, Tech, give me 2 out of the 3 of those teams, get me overs. I feel pretty good about that. These 3 teams that I just mentioned, I think those are definitely in play for the Big 12 championship.
That's what's kind of cool about the Big 12. I feel like yes, there's favorites. Like Utah is going to be one of the favorites, but there's probably like a solid 6, 7 teams that like at the end of the year they could be up there. So it's kind of an exciting conference to watch in that respect.
Yeah, I'd make the argument. I think I was going through this in my head. I think you could make the argument there's like 10 teams that I think could make the conference championship game. Maybe not win the league, but I think let's just do it this way. These are name as many teams as you can that you think
Could
for
potentially
sure
get
will
there.
not make the Big 12
Oh,
championship.
for sure will not. Houston, Baylor,
Arizona State, BYU,
Arizona State,
Cincinnati.
BYU, Cincinnati. Um,
Is that it? I mean,
I guess so.
so that's 5. So that means that's 11 teams. Basically, everybody else, I think you can make a good argument that that team, if things bounce their way, can make the Big 12 championship game. I mean, that's almost 2/3 of the league right there. I think that's
That's
pretty
why
awesome.
that's why it's hard to go at high confidence with any of these because there's just so much parity in the league.
Exactly. And I love it. And I think the new Big 12, now that I'm doing my research here and I'm looking at these teams' schedules and whatnot, I'm like, man, this is gonna be a fun league. Like I am legitimately going to enjoy the Big 12 because it's going to be a parity driven league, and that's pretty fun. And I think that there's just going to be a lot of variance here. So I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out. But the next video, we got all the newcomers. We got the four corners coming in from the Pac-12 plus BYU. So it'll be all the West teams in the next video: Arizona, Arizona State, BYU, Colorado, and Utah. Wrapping it up. And that'll conclude the Big 12 before we move on to the SEC. And yeah, man, we're trekking along here. And if you're a fan of one of these Big 12 teams, leave us a comment. Let us know your thoughts and opinions. Let us know how you think. Do you agree with us? Do you disagree with us? Are there certain players you think we're overlooking? Are there certain players that you think maybe we are too high on? Just let us know. Let us know anything, all comments and thoughts and opinions. And without further ado, this is Xan Shoob for the Saturday Scholars signing out. See y'all later and enjoy your off season. College football is coming shortly around the corner.
Saturday Scholars on the mic, breaking it down so right. Their analysis hits the target, prediction accuracy so razor tight. Bank account on the rise with each winning call. Not here for hot takes, just the facts, that's all. Getting out, shooting snacks and zany bars, a treat for each week. College football fans rejoice, find what you seek. Hidden gem in the podcast world, they know all. Saturday Scholars anthem, standing tall and tall. Saturday Scholars, the kings of the game, making waves with the knowledge, bringing the fame. Tune in each week, we stay on track. The Saturday Scholars, we got your back. The Saturday Scholars, the kings of the game, making waves with the knowledge, bringing the fame. Tune in each week, we stay on track. The Saturday Scholars, we got your back. Oh, oh. Oh, oh. Getting out, shooting snacks and zany balls, a treat for each week. College football fans rejoice, find what you seek. Hidden gem in the podcast world, they know all. Saturday Scholars anthem, standing tall and tall. Saturday Scholars, the kings of the game, making waves with the knowledge, bringing the fame. Tune in each week, we stay on track. The Saturday Scholars, we got your